You're watching Play, Watch, Listen, which is a games industry podcast mostly hosted by game developers. This podcast is published on this channel every second week and is supported by our supporters on Patreon, who also get longer cuts, completely unedited episodes, and early access. So if you support on Patreon, thank you for allowing us to continue making this very independent, completely sponsorship-free show. Now here's the show. Today I have a topic though. There is actually something that I want to talk to you about.
Structure.
I know.
I just want to be clear as well with the audience. We have addressed the cushion privately before the call. I'm not just unaware of the cushion. We know the cushion's there.
For the rest of you,
it's great.
None of your business. Nobody asks questions. It's Troy.
It's Troy.
I did see a movie last night, but I was like, and I definitely want to talk to you both about it, but if I open with that, it'll end up being a whole podcast episode about some movie that came out forever ago, and we just did The Expanse. Okay, this is a video game show. I wanted to talk about, this is from Rock Paper Shotgun. Baldur's Gate 3 publishing director says almost all games should cost more at a base level because they cost so much to make. I have no doubt that we have spoken about cost of video games prior, on an episode of, one of the 400 years that we've been making this show. And my opinion on it has changed over time. I used to have the stance that video games are way too expensive. Oh, sorry, way too cheap considering the cost. Like, the cost of making them these days is expensive. Quality is only increasing. They are becoming more and more expensive to make, and thus should increase to the consumer. But then I shifted at some point to be like, well, hang on now. I've seen those CEO bonuses. And I think I got capitalism pilled, and am now like, I don't know if video games need to be more expensive, and instead would prefer we pay the suits less. Because I feel like there is so much conversation surrounding this from so many different people. I've seen so many different takes, even from people who, do business in the games industry, about whether games are too expensive or whether the industry has become, kind of unsustainable in how capitalism-y it has become. So I don't actually know where I land on this anymore. I don't know what my stance is. Should video games be more expensive? Is it unsustainable? Are they getting out of control? And that's only getting worse as I feel like consumer expectation continues to rise, right? I don't know. Mike. Thoughts?
That's what I was going to ask you. Well, I've got lots of thoughts, but I'm interested in, because you're definitely more. You talk to the gamers more than I talk to the gamers, the consumers, the people who actually play our things. Where do you think public opinion is on this? Like, what do people? Obviously, no one's going to volunteer to pay more for something, but do you get the impression that people think that AAA games are currently like a bargain? Is that like a perspective that's out there? I don't see that.
Both, and I think
right.
So I think the core gamer does not think about this. I think the two camps are the two sides of my brain. There are definitely people on one side, I saw this just the other day, saying video games too expensive, game devs already get paid too much. And then I watched like an Instagram comment thing about how game devs already get paid too much and have crazy salaries. And I ended up commenting.
Speaking of game devs who get crazy salaries.
Paid too much. I left a comment on a thread because there was a guy who was saying the correct thing, which is, well, no, they don't get paid as much as you think they do. Basically saying, hey, just so you know, I got paid more at Rooster Teeth than I get paid to work at Sony Santa Monica Studio. Still true. And that's a thing that nobody ever expects to be real, because it's Rooster Teeth. I think people definitely overinflate how much game devs earn, but then on the second point, the other side also exists of people being like, these people don't earn anywhere near enough money. It's an industry full of crunch. Like, it's both. I think that both sides of my brain are also represented in the audience. There are people who care about working conditions and recognize that video games have gotten really expensive, and they don't really understand why, I think, is part of that. Why are they getting so much more expensive as tech is getting better is certainly a question.
I think that's a fair question as well. Like there's a lot of efficiencies that have happened over the last decade, like, for sure, and continue to happen, right? Hey, Austin.
Hi.
Welcome to the show, Austin. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. It's always nice to be a guest on Play, Watch, Listen.
Just delighted to have you.
Do you think games are too expensive, Austin?
Do you think games are too expensive?
should be more expensive, Austin? What do you think?
Do I think they're too expensive? That's a very interesting. That puts me in a very awkward position because ideally they have gargantuan budgets entirely owing to their composer fees.
Absolutely.
But I think that I think that this requires a bit of a nuanced touch because
Excellent. We're on a podcast.
This is what we're here for.
Well, because games have been made, great games have been made for less money than ever before at the same time that they've been made for more money than ever before.
True.
And I think, like, for example, the Banner Saga was made off of a Kickstarter of $700,000 for all of it. And like that, each game subsequently had bigger and bigger budgets owing to the fact that they were able to leverage the sales, like the income from the game, and the team grew. But the very first Banner Saga was basically the 3 core guys, former BioWare, like Star Wars Old Republic, and they brought in me, and then there was a sound design team from Australia, and that's kind of it. And yep, thanks to you. And yep,
they probably know each other.
And
oh yeah, it's definitely my dad and his mates. Yeah, there's only 5
exactly.
of us.
Exactly. So, like, there's a game that was made, that is, I think, of extreme high quality. I think the Banner Saga is incredible.
We always talk about Stardew Valley, right?
Stardew Valley and Undertale were made, like for
Recent
essentially
10s.
nothing.
Yeah.
And so I think we end up with this kind of outliers defining the conversation where, yes, God of War is presumably in the hundreds of millions, and like Naughty Dog and Insomniac Games, and
how did anybody know?
And GTA, Destiny, all games that are in the, they left behind the 99 and below million bracket a long time ago. I think BioShock Infinite was 200 something. I seem to remember reading around the time that it was, or
right.
like 150, 200, just gargantuan budgets. But remember that, as we've also talked about in the past on here, it's like 1,000 games come out a month on Steam. Well, probably 999 of those are in the, a couple million and below category, being made by small teams.
I would say even 99% of them are the $10,000 and below category. Like,
very well, could be. So I think to say games are getting too expensive is really more like a specific type of game is getting very expensive. So we close
that bracket. If we talk about the context of the article is specifically talking about, it was Baldur's Gate 3 publishing director, and they made the comment that was basically, we're all just waiting for GTA 6 to do it so we can do it, which to me comes across as, it's easy if we contain the conversation to AAA, right? Because we still exist in an ecosystem where AA games published by Devolver Annapurna can be any price range. I don't feel like they often have like set pricing models for those games, and I appreciate that. Like they kind of assess core marketing. What do we think people will pay for this? What do we think the price says about what the game is? How long is it? Whatever. That's how much it's going to cost. AAA, everyone seems to copy everybody else, right? We have like a set standard price for AAA. There aren't games that are more or less. And I think that he's right that if we're waiting for GTA 6 to do it, they'll be first, and then everyone else will do it afterwards. It's not like people are going to not sell a game for $70 if GTA manages to push through that. So if we talk about AAA games specifically being too expensive, I'm inclined to think the publishers agree right now that they are too expensive. I think that is coming from inside the house. The industry itself thinks they cost...
The publishers should be
They
less
think they cost too much to make. Not to sell. Sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, as the ones footing the bill for that, it wouldn't shock me that they are excited to find ways to spend less.
I mean, for sure, but I think it's especially at a head right now.
I think we've
leading into that,
hit
but
one of those inflection modes.
They're officially trying to cap things where previously there was a little more leeway for how much you could spend. I feel like that is being drawn back, and I am curious to see what the next several years of releases look like, knowing that that is talk among AAA publishers that they want things to cost less, or I feel like cost is, I'm using the word poorly. They want to spend less on dev, not that they want consumers to pay less.
They want games
Surely
to
these are two
cost
separate
less
terms,
and
and I don't.
charge more. Yeah.
Yes,
There you go. Let's use cost and charge, because otherwise we will
cost and
spend
charge.
half an
Okay,
hour. Yeah.
so cost is how much they cost to produce, right?
Yep.
So yes, I think the publishers have decided games cost too much, and I do think we are going to see a ripple effect of that over the next couple of years, where they have tasked AAA studios with spending less money than they did even on their previous releases. And I'm interested to see how that shapes out and what that looks like. And I mean, really, it's just a bunch of AAA game devs tricking people into not noticing that that's a thing is the reality. So it could be kind of fun. Like, we could see some interesting creative stuff come out of that. But at the same time, are we at a point where increasing the charge is what we decided the word would even alleviate any of the problems? How much more money do they need?
Well, that's the question, and that's the economic question with any product, right? Is if the charge goes up but fewer people buy it, you make less money. It doesn't matter to a AAA publisher how much the box makes. What matters is how much the population of sales makes in total. So if you make a game and it costs you 200 million to make, and it's exactly the same to you if you sell 100 million units at $2 or a million units at $200.
Right.
That's the same outcome. Now there are obviously differences to that, but from a fundamental point of view, that's what has driven most of the entertainment industry. Because the same is true of movies. If I go and buy a cinema ticket, that cinema ticket doesn't cost. It's arguably even more true of movies. Actually, inversely true that indie cinema tickets cost more usually than a blockbuster.
Have I ever told you, Mike, that I love the way you say cinema?
Do I say it in a very posh English way?
Cinema?
You pronounce it different. I've noticed it over the years of the show. You say cinema with a hard A on the end. I would just say cinema. I don't think it's necessarily posh, but it's an accent, and I like it.
I do. I unfortunately have received pronunciation kind of Queen's English accent because of childhood inability to talk. But anyway, it's fine.
Wait, what?
I do have a weird accent. Oh, this has come up on the show.
You didn't speak as a child?
I couldn't speak as a child. I'm sure that's come up on the show. I had learning to. I sound a lot posher than I am. English people will hear my voice and immediately put me in a social class, which is not where I'm actually from.
Benefits to that,
because they don't teach you an accent when they teach you how to speak. I literally have memories of like someone holding up cue cards and going "cat" at me. Like I can.
Oh wow, you can remember learning to speak.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Wow.
Well, it was like
I've made up for lost time.
Age 14.
We got to get this man on more podcasts.
No, my little sister taught me like my first word. Like
no
that's wild,
way.
Right? Yeah,
wow.
It's really weird.
It explains so much.
I know it's we're unpacking layers. It's
cinema.
Yeah. It's always I am yes cinema. But the point is no, the cost of purchase is ultimately decided by the consumer. The cost of production is decided by the producers, but also defined by the capacity they think something has to make a profit.
Sure.
If when I'm budgeting a game, I have to decide how realistically how many copies are we gonna sell of this, and how much can I really get away with charging for it. And that's ultimately a sum that you're doing with every project you make, and you're always trying to keep that on the right side of it. And obviously, when you fuck up, that's when things go very badly. I think as an industry, we are at an inflection point, as you say, Alana, where stuff is getting so expensive that we are and we're also simultaneously telling consumers to spend less on games up front with free to play, Game Pass, all of these things. We are at a point where you can have something like today where Concord was just unreleased, right? Something like that can just happen.
I wonder how much money they lost.
I didn't hear that.
Concord has been announced that they're taking it offline.
They've recalled it basically. They've taken it offline and they're giving full refunds to everyone. Yeah.
With the idea being to just memory hole it, or the idea being to somehow retool it and try again.
Either way, could be that. Could be that. Probably they're retooling it for free to play. Would be my completely uninformed guess. If they think that it's got legs. But anyway, my point is it's there. The stakes are very high. I do feel for a game like Baldur's Gate where it's like a single player campaign game, because the challenge there is, and this is the great trick that the games industry has pulled, is games haven't been AAA games have not had a fixed price for a long time because they've done DLC,
True.
season passes, extra content, multiplayer. Like there's been lots of ways they can essentially extract as much money from you as a fan want to pay. If you're an Assassin's Creed fan, you can consume Assassin's Creed at the baseline price every year, or you can buy that special edition every year. You can purchase a t-shirt. You can go, and there is no limit to how much money you can spend as an Assassin's Creed fan on Assassin's Creed should you choose to.
Even more so now that in a lot of modern Ubisoft games you can buy they have microtransactions that would give you but they use them for really specific interesting things. Like they can give you like crafting tools that you would otherwise have to spend a bunch of time trying to find. And I think that's like I guess Capcom's done that a little bit too. But you're right, there is now no limit on how much you can spend on even a single player.
And that's I think a lot of like economists that I've read on this stuff have basically said that, look, the perfect system from their perspective is you get the exact highest amount you can get from every consumer. That's ultimately like that's the dream. Like if there's a person who's going to spend no money on your movie, let them see it for free. If there's a person who's going to would be able to and willing to spend $100 on your movie, get $100 from them. And that's kind of that's the quote unquote dream from like a capitalistic economic point of view. And I wouldn't be shocked if that's where games ultimately are going, that we essentially end up with essentially free games and then those kind of additions. But yeah, in the short term, that's so far games have still somehow clung to the idea of it being worth purchasing. We're the one remaining media that's the case for.
Sorry, how do you feel like that? How do you feel like that doesn't apply to the cinema?
No, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't. The cinema actually is pronounced. I think that has already happened to cinema. Is my point. Is if you're a movie fan, you get to choose the exact price you want to pay to see a movie, just by time. Well, if I wanted to see Alien Romulus because I'm a massive fan of the Alien franchise.
Yesterday, day before.
Yep, went and saw it in a cinema. I saw it on release day with a friend. I went to London to see it in a nice cinema, blah, blah, blah. Actually, it was a really weird cinema. That's a whole other story. I bought my popcorn. I had like the luxury experience. And if they release an art book, I'm going to buy the art book. And I had an experience. I had a process. If you look at that and you go, well, I want to see it, but I don't want to leave the house, then there's going to be you can buy it on iTunes when it comes out. If you wait a couple more months, you can watch it on Disney Plus, and you get that granulated pricing.
Yeah.
Games don't have that, but also we don't have the free thing outside of specifics like Game Pass, say, where some AAA games you can get for free, quote unquote, with a subscription. We don't yet have. Games have managed in a way that all other entertainment media you can watch on a TV has not. We have managed to maintain that price point, and obviously, as someone who runs a video game company, I would very much like us to continue to have that value. But it might be inevitable that that's going to get pulled back.
I think this is all just a demonstration that economics is simply a descriptive term for the way in which people interact and how they ascribe value to things. Because,
game balancing, but in real life,
because the interesting
hate being asked. Sorry, I've always hated this, and it always seems so snooty. But whenever someone says, "Should I buy this game? Is this game worth it?" I'm always like, I've always hated that as a game review sort of.
I mean, you fill in this census about your household income.
I don't know you own, how much money you earn, or how much you value things. I can tell you if I like the game, but I cannot tell you if this game is worth it for you, because what I think it's crazy to spend $200 on a dress, but I'll spend $600 on a statue that just sits there. Like our sense of value is so different that whenever somebody asks me, "Is this game worth $20?"
50 cents on a cushion. Yeah.
Oh, how dare you! This is clearly more than 50 cents. It's perfect. And also Rahul bought it. But
there was no doubt in my mind.
I didn't need to tell you.
To be clear. Yeah.
I think value is so subjective that it part of the article actually touches on this. Douse, who is the publishing director for Baldur's Gate 3, said, "I think a game should be priced accordingly with its quality, breadth, and depth. And the publishers should be more upfront and honest about wanting to charge more for games rather than putting out special editions that muddy the picture," which is kind of what we're talking about. "Almost all games should cost more at a base level because the cost of making them, inflation for one, is outpacing pricing trends. But I don't think we'll get there with DLC promises so much as quality and communication. Everyone's just waiting for GTA 6 to do it." Lol.
I respectfully disagree with that position. I don't think we as developers get to decide what the price of our game is ultimately. Like, I think we have to. We can try and convince the audience that it's worth a price, but ultimately the audience will tell us if it's worth that price.
Well, yeah, and then
It's
you
one
would also
area
end up with
where I go
$1,000
very
games.
into tradition. Say again, sorry.
Then you would also end up with $1,100 games. Like you would end up with, well, I guess we sort of have that with, what's that game that's not out that people are already spending $9,000 on?
Star Citizen.
Yeah, Star Citizen. Which
Well,
I've been
yeah,
meaning to play for a
exactly.
long time, but I guess people have already
my
spent a
thing-
lot of money on Star Citizen.
My thing for a while now
A
has
lot.
been
I
like,
mean, it's like
I am
literally
One of the most
in the
expensive games
multiple
ever made. It's just that it's not out, so it doesn't count.
Yeah.
I'm shocked that we don't have. I think I've said this on the show before. I'm shocked that there is not a marketplace for. Hello, I'm a multi-millionaire. I would love this specific niche indie game to exist. Make it for me and me alone. I like someone who comes to a me or another kind of indie developer and goes, "Here's $100,000. I want a custom game for me and me alone." I've never heard of that happening. I'm surprised it never has, because it exists in the film world, it exists in the music world, it definitely exists in the porn industry. Like there's a whole raft of what people making custom one-off content for people. I'm surprised games haven't done. I've never heard of that happening. Oh yeah, because you can take the gun with you, Alana, into any game.
Yeah, that's how games work. Copy paste.
That's how games work. You can take the gun.
We all know that.
That's
interesting.
I am shocked.
I mean,
NFTs still work. NFTs
to...
are still happening. It's wild.
Yeah, but thankfully not as much as games, right?
No, there's NFT games like that. That marketplace. I'm shocked whenever one of them kind of crosses my radar, but they still are happening. It's
I guess
wild.
I do get sponsor emails for NFT Web3 games pretty often.
Can we get sponsored by some? Can we get this show sponsored by some NFT web games?
Yeah, the audience would understand, right?
We got to make money.
I'll
read the copy.
We got to make money.
Take the gun into any game, guys.
We promise.
Any game.
Trust me, bro.
I bet those people are still in our comments telling me that I don't understand NFTs. I'm sure they'll still be. They'll still show up.
They'll show up there. Yeah,
good to see you again,
you've
guys.
Summoned them. Welcome back.
Yeah.
What were we talking about? I had something to say and now I've forgotten it. The idea of things being made for an individual. Yeah. We did. Patrons used to be how art was made, right? Like Mozart was effectively patroned, I don't know if that's the correct word, but to write operas for different people and to write a particular song for somebody. I think they ended up all being released. I don't know if there are any hidden secret Mozart works, but we used to have individual people who would fund creative projects, and I think we have completely effectively lost that. Side by side, games becoming too expensive, right? Like, how would you fund a single video game?
You couldn't fund like a AAA game. If Elon Musk wanted like a AAA
fund whatever he wants, but
shooter, he probably could. Sorry, I put the wrong example there. But like someone with less money but more stringent morality would
my gut tells me
would not be able to do it.
My gut tells me part of the answer to this is that it doesn't work. There have been times where huge amounts of VC money, or things like the Stadia, large corporate entities throw seemingly unchecked dollars at something, and it doesn't yield the spark that is expected from those investors.
Yeah,
and I think that it could be that there have been multiple attempts at something like you're describing, and it just doesn't come to be.
True.
And I've had people ask me before. I've had not necessarily like billionaire class type people, but have people ask me, what would it take? I have an idea. What would it take to get together a team to make that happen? And I'm like, every developer I've ever worked with worth their salt is busy with their own thing. They're not just guns for hire, roving the landscape, eager to make whoever's game idea comes
5
along.
million, we can have a conversation. If
There
you're watching
are
this, call me 5 million. That's the line. We'll have a chat. We'll have a chat about your idea.
There are like co-dev studios and stuff. Obviously,
there are work for hire studios. Like that's what we're ultimately kind of talking about. There are those studios, and they're not studios anyone would have heard of, but there are studios doing that kind of work.
There are work for hire studios that you will have heard of, but not many of them.
We're a work for hire studio, I guess, that people will have heard of.
True, but most of them don't stay that way very long because a lot of them are just making franchise games that are relatively cheap in the grand scheme of things until they can fund making their own game. Like that's how Rocket League
Yes,
came
yeah.
about, right? Like they are making smaller little titles that are tied to some Nickelodeon franchise before they get funding to make their own thing. So yeah, I mean, the idea thing is one of my favorites because obviously I have people come to me with ideas for video games all the time. And I have to have a meeting with a friend sometime soon who's like, I have this book, I could easily get the license. I want to make it into a game. And he was like, can I talk to you about it? And I was like, the short answer is you can't. The long answer is I will give you a lot of steps that you could take that would make this possible. But it is extremely difficult for the reason you said. Everyone's already busy making something. The people who have the skills to do it don't want to do it for someone else. Why? You've already got your own shit to work on. I mean,
ideas are not the limited resource in the industry that I think people
totally.
think that the reason the game they want doesn't exist is because no one's thought of it. That is not the case. It's usually because no one could get any money to make it. So,
Yeah.
but if you have money and an idea, I've definitely I've encountered at a bigger scale. I have encountered those conversations are starting to happen. But yeah, it's not. Yeah, I don't know. I think fundamentally it's we don't get to decide. The audience gets to decide, and we have to figure out our business model to support what the industry, what the customer will buy. The counter to that is the Steve Jobs argument of the audience don't know what they want until you try and make it for them. So you should always try new things and try new business models and try new approaches because you never know. But yeah, it's
I
not up
want
to
to
us.
circle back to the perception of value and price and whatnot, because I know it's come up. I'm sure it's come up on this show in the past, but there's always a very interesting um, case study in the form of a new game on the PlayStation Store relative to a new mobile game. And the idea that they are an order of magnitude or two apart from each other in price. Like if there was a $70 game on the Apple Store, that would be like the
Ludicrous.
least
It'd be
the
absurd.
least
That'd be a news
downloaded thing.
story. That would be a
Um,
whole yeah.
yeah, and so obviously there's an interesting price perception is is most of how all this works. And like you said, you don't get to tell them it's going to cost this much. It's this constant battle where everyone is taking these swings and hopefully well calculated risks on, will this actually return an investment based on any realistic number of sales that it can turn? Can it even break even? And so what I suspect is the case in terms of if there is the objective fact that game price to consumer and game production costs are both perpetually rising. My gut tells me that, like so many other things, the economics of this will prove to be cyclical, where if you look at Hollywood, the 40s and 50s saw the apex of like the grand spectacle epic films, Ben-Hur, The Ten Commandments, all those kinds of movies. And then, all it takes is like a Cleopatra coming along and absolutely, completely financially shitting the bed for them to go, maybe we shouldn't make movies like this. And then you see the 60s and 70s where there's this huge pivot away to a very different, far lower expensive way of doing things because they say, the consumer is increasingly uninterested in paying for a thing that costs this much to make. So we're just not going to do it. I feel like we're surely like on the precipice of Marvel finally going, okay, we just can't lose a few $100 million each time. So we're going to have
It is
to,
happening
we're just going
kind
to
of at the
have to
same
move away
rate
from this.
with a lot of films that it's happening with games right now, I suppose. But part of it
It's
is
both
that
sides of it are actively working there because if the consumer is increasingly less excited by it, but more drawn to other stuff, then that's where the money is going to go. And presumably it's something that the costs of which have not ballooned up through this arms race of spectacle and can
where
be
it
made
gets
more affordably.
finicky with games, and they all say this in their earnings calls and have been for years, like since I worked at IGN, which somehow was almost 10 years ago. That I started. That's so weird to think about. Because I used to actually listen to all the earnings calls or investor calls. I don't so much anymore. But there's this huge thing in the games industry from all the CEOs where they talk about player time. Like, gamers are still showing almost exponentially that they have interest in consuming video games. There has not been a drop off in the same way that there is drop off in sales for film, because that translates so directly. Whereas with games, they might be buying less games, but player hours are through the roof, right? So the consumer is showing that they are deeply interested in, and in theory highly value the product, because they're spending so much fucking time in it, that interest is not waning. And we don't really, I guess, know if people are going to buy GTA 6 if it's $70. I would bet $1,000 that 100% the sales will not be affected by Grand Theft Auto 6 being $10 more expensive, unfortunately, which probably could kickstart a trend, right? But because player time is so specific where the games industry is concerned, and they keep like comparing, you go see a movie for 2 hours, you spend $20 or whatever. Why can you play a game for 200 hours and only spend $50? How is that fair? At least I know that that's like some of the logic that comes from some of these investor calls. I always figured that we were fairly likely, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet, especially with the rise of VR, as slow as that's been, that we haven't seen more advertising in games. That we haven't yet had, I know there have been whispers of it recently, that there haven't been, you can't see this cutscene until you watch this ad. I'm terrified of that happening and do not want it. But that always seemed something that would be more likely to
mobile
me.
games have been doing that for years.
True. It just hasn't existed in our space yet.
Crazy money hand over fist over as a result.
It's a big scary thing. Like because you can't.
How do you monetize hours? GTA... That's the challenge they have, right? How do you monetize hours? Because players are showing they're interested. They're showing they think games are valuable, but the publishers aren't seeing return from the amount of time. It's like, I think they feel like players are getting free content because they're spending 1,000 hours in something they only paid $60 for.
That is how they view it. That is how they view it. And I think, and that's why I'm sympathetic actually to like something like Baldur's Gate, which arguably is worth more than people pay for it.
Shit ton of time in that game.
You spend crazy amount of time in it. But I think the industry has found a business model, and it's the Fortnite business model. It's free to play. It's
battle passes.
That because Fortnite 100% monetizes their players' hours rather than their players kind of getting in there. It is an investment, and you sink that time into it. That adds value and importance to the assets and items that you purchase.
True.
It is that kind of virtuous cycle from a sales perspective. I think as an industry, if we want that, and I agree that timeshare thing is the big thing, that I feel very bad for those AAA developers who are still working on kind of single player or story driven content and want to make stuff like that, because the marketplace is kind of saying we don't want to pay for that, as much as we used to.
It's one of those that
welcome back to 10-hour games, man. Why do they have to all be 60? That's why I keep being like, just make them short
because
again.
The last one was 55.
Yeah, and that's part of it, is that consumer expectation is only expanding. Yeah. Consumer expectation is only getting higher, and that's sort of part of this, is like, while costs are not increasing. So yeah, you used to have a 12-hour video game where the same franchise will now give you a 50-hour video game for the same price. That is pretty nuts. Like, that is sort of a fuck up on the industry's behalf to do that, but
no, it's not. It's them responding to what players want. If they didn't do that, they'd sell even fewer games, because it's very clearly responding to what players are actually wanting to do.
Interesting.
Also, I feel like it happened the other way around. Sells more units than the last one did as well.
Right. I mean, that's
the total profits.
You guaranteed that way. But I had always pictured the more hours getting added was not because consumers indicated that they wanted that from video games. It was, I always had felt like that was coming creatively, in that devs get more and more ambitious and worse at cutting things back. Like,
I'm not
they've
so
just
sure.
Expanded that. I don't know if it was chicken or the egg.
Journey was certainly very well received, but the only consistent complaint that it got was that it was too short. And look at The Order 1886. That was the number one complaint of that game, despite the fact that it looks like it came out today. It's one of the
beautiful.
most
I love that
unbelievably visually sort of highly achieving games. But it was like, you're expecting me to pay this rate. It's like when you're looking at real estate, you always see what are the houses nearby cost about, and try to get a sense of what would be a fair comparison.
Yeah.
And if this game is half the length, people are going, well, I don't get it. to your earlier point about game developers thinking, or game publishers rather, saying this, we're kind of giving away free content because look at, movies are offering like 1,000th the time for only a third the price or whatever. I think it's probably more the opposite angle is what I had to guess. I think movies are operating on borrowed time, realizing that they're essentially overcharging dramatically because the consumer has already voted with their feet through the streaming platforms that they would prefer the subscription model or paying next to nothing. So it's more that cinema tickets are by that measure severely overpriced, and what you're paying for is the cinema experience, which is why my gut is as tragic as I find this personally, because I love the movie theater experience, and I love being in a theater full of like engaged people that are super stoked on what they're watching, and they are very like I saw Romulus in a packed theater and just like a Burbank theater, and people are screaming and all this stuff. And opening night at Infinity War was one of the greatest experiences of my entire life. Just the most roused audience I've ever imagined. And I think increasingly cinema will be a very like niche, expensive thing.
Luxury.
It's the equivalent of like going to the opera. People don't associate that as like a kind of normal, working class night out. It's like, I want to do something fancy.
It was.
That's the thing.
Which is why Austin's probably right. The theater is probably on borrowed time.
Theater is the vestigial appendix of an outdated media, basically. Like on a commercial level, like that was. 100 years ago, you were going to the theatre, you were going to see shows in local theatres, you were paying nothing to go and see them because that was the prime, that was an entertainment, that was not the primary form of entertainment, but a lot of the entertainment, and now we are in that phase, and I think you're right. I think it'll absolutely kind of dwindle in that way. I don't want games to until I'm retired, though. That's my kind of key thing, is I want games to last just long enough for me to have a career in them.
Yeah, it is interesting where I think my sort of as high an altitude as I'm able to get on it view of this is that, if I pitch to you an absolutely ludicrous concept, if I say, okay, I want to make a game that is it's a city builder that operates in real time. So, it'll take you like 5 to 10 years to make any kind of headway in the game of literal real world time. But I want it to have a level of fidelity and immersiveness that means I can't possibly do it for less than $500 million production budget. Like that is nothing about that can't be done. But that is a financial disaster. There's no conceivable world where a game like that greenlit wouldn't lose every dollar spent on it, right? So we can hypothetically imagine very easily games that would fail. So I don't see why it's not just a slight lateral move to go, the generic default presumption would be things like the Fortnite model, which are very tailorable to the player and therefore very attractive. That's very pro player because it's like we can iterate on our design to really optimize to what the player is looking for and get real-time data. And it's also very opt-in for whatever they want to spend. It's like a dream scenario economically for consumer and producer in so many ways. But if you're the kind of creative person that says, well, I want to make a single player game that's, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, well, it just means that there's probably a price cap on how much you can spend on a game like that moving forward.
Which there sort of hasn't been.
We're not saying it's dying
previously.
out. We're not saying it's done. That's the thing people say, which is stupid. I've been saying the entire time I've been in the industry.
Yeah.
We're just saying, there's a cap. There is a cap, probably.
It's no different than your uber budget, outrageously stupid idea city builder game. If there's a budget cap on how much a game like that could cost to be viable, I don't see why even in a really great game, it's just going to have a kind of market correction where they go,
if you make that on an indie budget, Austin, you're going to win every award available that year. If you make real-time City Builder, the indie game, you're going to be phenomenal. It's going to be a phenomenon. But you're right. You don't it doesn't cost much to make, and you don't charge much for it, and that would be very successful. Or you charge loads for it because it's a boutique like there's lots of room to play.
Well, that's
what you can't do is define to the audience what
that's I
value.
think why it's complicated. Correct. Is we have the data, the proof that players value time playing video games, right? Like, again, yes. Through the fucking roof. Like, exponential rise isn't slowing down, especially easy with a game like Fortnite, where I feel like any game like that exists, it's so much easier on the dev side as well to provide engaging content because the content actually comes from the other players and not from the game itself. Like, not that the game doesn't facilitate that, but when you drop in, you're getting fun because of the other human reactions, right? Like, that is almost like an infinitely renewable resource that is less intensive on a dev team, which is obviously super desirable. But we have tons of player interest, clearly. And this article, again, Rock Paper Shotgun, is saying the cost of developing a AAA game has risen approximately tenfold over the last 15 years. The customers probably not noticed very much, though, and that's from the Financial Times. Video games are considered to have poor pricing power, which means that the standard storefront price has risen only 17% since 2007, which is a really interesting way to put it, that video games have poor pricing power. Capcom's
not
president,
really keeping up with inflation at all,
right?
Which also has been true. Like, if you go back to like an N64 game in real money nowadays, is what would cost, like, I can't remember what it was, like $150 or something. Like, it's ridiculous.
They made them
like,
so
video
fast,
games have actually
though.
been plummeting.
Yeah.
Say again.
They made them so fast.
Plummeting in value the whole time.
Right.
They did make them fast.
Which is, they've been plummeting in value. I've just never considered our industry to have poor pricing power, but it does. They've been plummeting in value and increasing exponentially. Capcom's president said development budgets have shot up 100 times since the heyday of the Famicom in the 90s. Considering the fact that wages are rising in the industry as a whole, raising unit prices is a healthy option for business. And I guess when we talk about a playground, the thing is we don't really... I'm sure there are a lot of marketing teams that have a lot of data that they have access to, but we kind of don't know what players will do until they do it, right? Like, until someone increases the price and then we see what actually happens.
If publishers could predict what players would do, it would be a much more successful industry.
Yeah, or there'd only be one publisher because they would have already
and one game
just figured it out. Yeah, it's Fortnite.
It's Fortnite. We've got 100% before.
So yeah, we ultimately don't know. And this is an interesting point too. So it's worth reiterating that there's a difference between a video game making its money back and a video game making enough money for its investors. As one developer told me during an interview about Embrace's cutting Chorus Devs Fish Labs, we made a shitload of money, but it doesn't go back into the games, which is something that I always mention with GTA 6 specifically, that I feel like Rockstar is a really uniquely placed studio and that they're one of the only ones that make basically, again, infinite cash with GTA Online. It prints money, shark cards for days. But we know that GTA Online being the way it is the reason that we're about to get the most expensive game ever made in GTA 6. I feel like they're one of the only ones that completely funds themselves.
It's them and Valve, basically.
Yeah, true.
GTA 5 is also on, like, if you look at the Steam sales charts on any random day, it's always like in the top 50 selling games, just permanently lives there. So you don't even need GTA Online, I think, to already be in the we can spend whatever we need to spend category. And that just doubles it somehow because I think GTA 5 is still insanely profitable.
True, that game. Selling. I wonder what the profits actually are for GTA 5, like how much profit it's made. But like, I'm glad that exists that way, because you'll see people talk shit about Rockstar repeatedly releasing new content for GTA Online, but a game like GTA 6, nobody else is positioned to make. Nobody else can make that because they are funding themselves with so much fucking money that they are allowed to make the most expensive game of all time without being worried about the risk. Literally nobody else in the entire industry has that freedom because we don't have GTA Online or GTA 5. Like, make all the fucking DLC if it means that I get to watch what Rockstar gets to do with the budget that they have. I'm always so excited to see it. No one else is even playing on their level, you know? Baldur's Gate 3... I actually don't know how much Baldur's Gate 3 costs. Sorry, Austin, I cut you off.
No, I was going to say the only other kind of analogous example that I can think of is how much reportedly Riot spent making Arcane, because they also were sitting on a money printing machine and were able to take a wild risk and self-financing their animated TV show, and reportedly spent just ungodly amounts of money. But the results also then spoke for itself because that show was fucking incredible.
Yeah.
And I was
forward like TV animation as an industry. like in
Yeah.
terms of what was expected. Yeah.
This is one of those things that as the person who defends free market interactions, this is the thing that drives me crazy about the critique of profit unto itself, where all that means is it is well, not all that it means, but one major component of that is it is a modifier on your risk tolerance to whatever you do next. And the the higher your margins, the bigger swings you are in a position to be able to take. And the narrower your margins, the more sort of narrow your thinking is going to just simply have to be to survive. Now, I know I'm oversimplifying, and I'm sure there will be plenty of people who love to jump down my throat on this. And
I'm not going to jump down your throat. I don't disagree with anything you're saying.
Well, I think GTA, for example, I mean, we haven't played GTA 6 yet, but in my opinion, what Rockstar does is the market working correctly. But there's still a caveat to that, in that, like, they still released a pretty poor port with Red Dead 2. I don't remember. The GTA remasters are pretty poor quality. Rockstar didn't make those, so that's like the publisher also just outsourcing those to re-release those things. But we didn't get more quality from those particular pieces of content because GTA is a whale and makes a shit ton of money.
No, I think that's I don't. So I think that's the nuance in what Austin said, which I think is important. Is profit creates the opportunity to
not a guarantee
to make more ambitious thing. There's no guarantee, because in order to keep being profitable, one should spend as little as possible. So there's going to be poor choices as well as a result.
Right.
But I agree. I think yes, long may companies make enormous profits and use those profits to make interesting, cool stuff. That sounds lovely. And I'm sure there are no flaws in capitalism. That
it's never gone poorly for anybody else. It does work for a Rockstar. It did work for Baldur's Gate 3 for Larian.
I can't wait for the new one.
Well, I mean, with Larian specifically, again, I don't know how much Baldur's Gate 3 actually cost them, but them going early access was, I mean, it's a risk that a lot of other studios wouldn't necessarily be able to take. It didn't impact their, I mean, I played a fucking preview of that game so long ago. It's so wild how long it was playable for before it came out. But that's still a risk in a lot of cases, because that can also really hurt your marketing. Like, if you have something in early access that is a constant flow of information that stops you from having the bomb to drop to get people to purchase the thing, to like continuously have interest, is a lot harder. There are so many challenges to that worked for them really, really well. And that one's a fun one because it's the people who wanted to play the finished game funding the game. Great.
I'm fascinated to see if anyone else emulates it. Like, it's because in AAA things take a while, so we won't see anyone try and copy the Baldur's Gate approach for a couple more years.
Well, arguably, Star Citizen is the apex predator of that approach, because
I suppose so. Yeah.
Because I remember seeing an interview with Sven when Baldur's Gate came out. When Baldur's Gate 3 first came out, there was an interview with Sven where he said something to the effect of, we didn't really have very high expectations, or we had very tempered expectations on what the sales realistically could be, because the early access had gone so well that it was kind of like, probably everybody who's interested in the game already has it. And that's the thing I keep thinking about with Star Citizen, where I go, they've sold so much, so many hundreds of millions to finance their production costs, that I just keep thinking, is there so much bigger of an audience out there who haven't participated in that yet?
I'm that audience. I'm Mr. into that kind of sci-fi. I love the aesthetics. They've hired most of my favorite art directors from the film industry to work on that game.
Look, I'm probably that audience too. The second it's a viable
product, I'll buy.
Me too.
But I haven't bought yet.
I haven't either, and I have intentions of playing it because of their stupid webcam thing. You know that if you play Star Citizen, if you have a webcam on your face, your player will emote the way that you're emoting. It's so fucking funny. Like, that is like why I want to buy that game, but I'm waiting until it's actually out because I want something feature complete, I guess. Like, I don't really know. But it's the same thing that I've always thought for GTA, Austin, which is, how is it always in the top 10 a lot of the times, not even the top 100? And it's kids. Same as Minecraft. It's people who are aging into GTA 5, which could still happen with Star Citizen. You got to think about all the people who aren't born yet who like space shit, who are going to buy Star Citizen if it ever comes out. Because I always forget that there's just a market of people who are turning, 14 every year and are finally buying GTA 5, and that's why it's always in the charts. There's just so many fucking people.
But the reason why that's usually not the case though is because a 14-year-old today doesn't have the same taste as a 40-year-old today often, and so they're going to gravitate towards different things.
Yeah.
So yeah, and yeah, exactly. And then when they turn 35, they might still be playing Fortnite, but the 14-year-olds then are going to be like, "What? No, that's an old person game." You know what I mean?
But Fortnite by that point will be like a gritty reimagining of Fortnite.
Yes, exactly.
With Robert Pattinson
starring Troy. You mean as the gravelly,
grizzled?
Yeah. It's very interesting. I mean, look, this just highlights that it's all a perpetual guessing game, trying to see what people are taking the temperature of what people actually like and what's out there, and meshing that. I think it's a beautiful thing, meshing that with someone having creative impulse, going, okay, I have a thing I want to make. I have this vision of an idea that excites me, and I want to put it out in the world because I want to live in a world where this thing exists. Now I have to figure out, do other people want this? And how much can I realistically, how elaborate can my production of this idea go relative to how many people like me there might be in the world? So what I love about where the indie world has evolved to is, if you're describing something that's presumably hyper niche, you can watch some tutorials online and duct tape together a viable game more than ever before today. If your game is for an audience of one, you can actually make that on viably-ish, at least better than ever before.
RPG Maker, dude. Jump right in.
Yeah.
But that's the trade-off you're always doing, and I mean that's what's interesting to me about the indie space as opposed to AAA. The same is true of AAA, but the numbers are just much bigger. But like, we definitely have sat down and gone, is this $100,000 game or a $5 million game, like, or a $10 million game? Like, there is, and you're right. It's about how long it'll take you to make, but it's also much more importantly, like, realistically, how big an audience do we think exists for this game? And we oscillate all over the place. Like, the scale of our games, the budget of our games, is much more defined by how many people we think would be interested in the initial idea than actually, like, I didn't sit down and go, what's the best possible version of Subsurface Circular? I sat down and went, well, there's probably only X number of people who actually would play this, so I should make something that will cover its costs and make a profit on that crowd. That's how you do it. But then the same is true of, like, when we go bigger, we make the exact same things, and then that impacts what genre you're in and what, if you're working with a franchise, what's the viability of this franchise? How much money does this franchise make historically? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
This was a seemingly near daily conversation while working on Stray Gods, because it was first off, we have zero comparisons we can draw on with regard to the musical aspect of it. So then our next best point of comparison is the so-called visual novel genre. And so we were looking at it going, like, because there were so many songs where we wanted to just, like, they would have been quadruple the scope. But then Liam would go and run the numbers on what the implications for our cast and recording studios and the time frame and all the animation budget required of the art team. He would go, we would have to literally be quadruple the sales of the best-selling visual novel genre game ever. Like, we would have to redefine, and hey, God willing, but it's bad leadership of the studio to essentially say, if we bet the farm in this way, meaning all these people are going to lose their jobs, and including me, speaking as Liam, I mean, Liam and David Gator both were, had put their whole life on the line for this company. They had to make very fiscally responsible decisions by saying, we have to keep our scope in check, because if we charge above a certain amount, we've abandoned the comparisons. And we would have to have some other play to kind of try to
fix that,
convince people.
I feel like that's the thing that a lot of people on the outside maybe don't know, is that a lot of the cases when we talk about how expensive AAA has gotten, a lot of the time it's accidental. Like, genuinely, you feel like every company from the outside is a well-oiled corporate machine, but that's still a bunch of creative people making stuff in a vacuum. I think that a lot of scope stuff, it just gets out of hand very fast, no matter how
project has to restart. That happens all the time behind closed doors.
Unpredictable.
you still have to cover the costs of the game that you're never going to release because you restarted the
Right,
project.
right.
So
Yeah.
now you've got this debt going in.
Yeah, and
That
it
happens a
just
lot.
gets
No
carried
one
away
knows.
so quickly,
Yeah.
unintentionally. You can try as you might, the more creative people you have, it's not even creative, it's just a reality of working on something for a long time. Things just really
I
get carried away.
sincerely hope, I sincerely hope related to this that Judas is a monster hit because
Been in dev for so
what
long.
and the reason why is because Ken's approach was like I don't want a giant lumbering team like on Infinite. I want to be able to experiment and iterate, and if the team is small, that's viable, and that's operating like an indie. Going, if we just take tiny bite sizes out of our cash flow, then we can work on this game for a long time, and the longer span on a smaller team is a different approach that is for a game of AAA kind of production value, that's like not an approach that companies really ever take.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously, especially big franchises that are like, we have a certain kind of release cadence we have to maintain here, and so the only way to do that is to just throw huge amounts of people at the dev
And I
cycle.
think that maybe used to be a AAA. This is the shift we're seeing, that I'm sure streaming services have changed. The way that people consume things is, I feel like a lot of AAA execs used to feel like AAA games were so expensive that they could not fail. And that may have been true, where they spent so much money on them and they spent even marketing money on them that everybody wanted to be up in that hype and wanted to buy however many of those AAA
Right.
games came out every year. I think we now have so many in some cases. There's a lot of studios who used to release one a year that are now doing more than one a year. Like they're competing with each other and on top of themselves. But also, like I said, I think that the change in how we consume entertainment media to be streaming focused has changed the way that consumers feel about that. And that's the shift that we're seeing. I think the industry maybe grapple with, is like that too expensive to fail thing is no longer really existing. Gotham Knights was very expensive and still ultimately failed. Though I don't know
This is
how
Yeah,
bad.
where
no guarantees.
a
Yeah.
proper deep analysis of the numbers is needed to really truly understand it, because
Yeah.
I actually have to run, but my little final thing that I'll say is that I remember Jason Rohr giving a talk at GDC 10 years ago, doing a bit of a sort of financial analysis of the so-called indie apocalypse. And the big takeaway that I had from his talk, which was really informative, was that he said the number of hits has remained quite consistent, in that the number of games that seem to grab people's attention and become big breakaway hits has not gone down. Everyone seems to think less games are hitting. They're not. We're just making so many more that our denominator has expanded considerably, but the same number of hits is about the same every time. So if you're making, it's sort of like almost kind of like the big fish small pond or small fish big pond kind of concept, where as the pond grows, how you spend your money to sort of be the biggest fish possible is going to influence your decision making, because the sort of number of fish that are caught has remained pretty steady. And it would seem, and that's interesting to me, that's because that's almost like a broad like social experiment of sorts, that the number of games that will hold the collective conscience of gamers every year is about the same, but whether they're coming from the indie space or from the AAA space is variable. How much they cost is variable, but the sort of finite absolute number of them seems to be reasonably consistent. At least it was on Jason's analysis, and it struck me as pretty compelling.
Interesting.
I think that was maybe true 10 years ago. I think what's interesting now is we were still kind of in the last stages of monoculture 10 years ago. I think what's fascinating to me now is that you can have games that have sold tens of millions of units that none of us have heard of. That's
Boy,
the
is
thing
that true.
I find. But I think I think you're right in the sense of mindshare per player has probably stayed about the same.
Right.
But I think the fact that there's been so much of a splintering of culture, it's so funny talking to like young people now who've never known a world where we're all hyped for that one game, or everyone's watching that one sitcom every Thursday. Like, that kind of monoculture that we all used to live in is gone. And that means that, yeah, like, there are entire games with enormous communities which I'll just catch wind of because, like, someone will tag me or one of our games in kind of a conversation about another game, and I'll look at it and it's doing phenomenally, and I've never heard of it. And I like to think of myself as someone who is paying attention, who does listen to the news and tune into, streamers and all this stuff, and I will never have heard of it, and it'll have its own whole subculture.
Yeah,
and
social media has
memes
really shifted that a lot, I think. Subcultures for games.
We're all
music,
in a little bubble.
Actors.
We're all in these little bubbles, yeah.
3 months ago, I had never heard ever of Sabrina Carpenter. And apparently, this is one of the biggest fucking pop stars in the world.
Same. I hadn't heard of her ever until recently, and now she's everywhere.
But she clearly
as well. Same thing.
Where you look, it's just we all increasingly kind of wall ourselves in. That's nothing new. But also the technology of our world has made it never easier to do that. Because it's crazy to me when I'll come across some singer, like I'm in the music industry, and I'll come across someone in the music industry with like 50 million Instagram followers, and I've never heard of them.
YouTubers,
and not
dude.
one person that I follow follows them either. And I'm like, it's wild.
Social media has created a lot of micro communities that are huge, but they're
also,
like
we're
so
getting
old,
and old people always think this, but
For
I
sure.
think it's also true at a cultural level as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's algorithms of
we're
feeding
right
people
in a way
the
that no one
bubbles.
else was.
Before we go, because I feel like we didn't really address it, any of us can answer this question. Here, throw it to the floor. Why have video games gotten so expensive? People talk about it all the time. What happens
to make?
That is to make. Why have they gotten so expensive to make?
Well, I think a big part of it is that, again, if we zero in on who we're talking about, because games that are being made in Los Angeles, San Francisco, London, Seattle, Montreal, these are expensive cities to live in, and high cost of living. If you have a studio that's based there, all these factors end up tethered to each other. And so somebody coming in who, if they were living in a rural part of Eastern Europe and said, I could live opulently on $50,000 a year, you'd be in borderline abject poverty living in for below $50,000 a year in somewhere like San Francisco. You'd have 7 roommates piled into a single 1-bedroom apartment kind of thing.
Yeah, I lived in the Tenderloin when I was living in San Francisco, making less than $50,000 a year, which is like the most dangerous neighborhood in a studio apartment with no parking
like
or laundry.
Internationally famously.
That's where I lived as a 22-year-old because I couldn't.
So you have people who are basically gonna essentially demand, higher salaries. But this is one of those where I do see that as, it would not surprise me if there's a bit of a bubble burst about to happen there. Across the board, that's not even specific to the game industry. I think a lot of these cities are kind of pulling themselves apart over these cost of living increases, where people are just leaving because they're going, to hell with this. $500,000 doesn't get me anything in Los Angeles. I can buy a fucking mansion in Kansas. So screw it. And
especially now that remote work is so much easier to do. I don't really need to live in LA.
No, same technically. If all my friends who I cared about didn't live here,
that's exactly my thought. All my friends
then it's like the people that I go out of my way to see. Also, like going to the bowl as I'm doing tonight for the 40,000th time this year. Like, those are fringe benefits that currently the price
is worth.
I have continued to feel is worth it, even though I begrudgingly am like, Jesus.
It's like living in LA is paying for a theme park, but you live in the theme park and it's fucking expensive. But I agree.
Yeah.
Right now,
so
I'm cool with it. I will leave.
I can tell
Speaking
you,
as someone who moved out of London for the same reason a few years ago, like, you're making the right choice. Stay where you are.
Yeah,
stay where your
enjoy
friends
the
are.
theme
like,
park.
That's 100%. Yeah, 100%.
I mean,
but then I'm gonna go move to Italy. It'll be great.
It's cost benefit analysis on a daily basis. Where is the return worth it? And I will say, I've started to see, like when I look at my team, you know, like check-in calls and sprint reviews and Slack, just ambient chatter on Slack on various projects, I see people saying, "Hey, we found this great designer in Spain and they're going to join the team."
Yeah.
And like, I think that the more and more and more that that happens and people are going, to hell with these $200,000 San Francisco salaries when I could find someone who is sort of equally qualified. And because the biggest thing that right now those hub based people have is lots of experience. But, once we're 5 and 10 years past, well, we're already 5 years past almost the start of the pandemic. Once we're 10 to 15 years past, and there's like been a lot of time for people to truly settle in, you'll have deeply veteran people in far-flung corners of the world. And I think that will force costs to come down, because you're just going to go, I just think of people like Liam running Summerfall going, I have a financial responsibility to keep this as cost controlled as possible. And if I can find someone who is super awesome and living in a part of the world where it just doesn't cost as much for them to survive, and they're willing to work for a fraction, I can keep the lights on this studio up for longer as a result.
I'd actually go further. Like,
that will bring the costs.
It's a conversation I have the most with like people who run like big studio or own big studios. They're already kind of going there in terms of, because there's also one thing you've got to remember as well. This happened in the animation industry a little while ago. There's so much outsourcing to Asian, African countries that is basically training up a generation of awesome game developers. And this happens, this has been a cycle that's happened. I was part of the British outsource bubble that happened, and all the big, those kind of situations. Canada, again, a brilliant example of somewhere where these companies are, whether intentionally or otherwise, building hubs in these countries, which, as you say, are just so much cheaper to live in, and that the staff, the work there are paid a lot less as a result. You're absolutely going to see in 10 years from now, there will be, like, in the same way as everyone was surprised by Polish game development studios getting massive, that's coming in terms of Asia and Africa. And I think the idea of like America and Europe even, I think America and Europe are going to be on the decline in terms of the games industry and the jobs available in those places very, very soon. And I've seen that discussed with fear, and I've seen that discussed with glee. That from people who are like, well, we're gonna get to pay people a lot less.
Yeah.
I've seen that perspective has been expressed by many CEOs in my presence. So I think that's coming for sure.
See that being a thing.
Which is, to be clear, a very cool thing if you live in those countries and are ready to make stuff. I remember talking to animators in India, like, God, it must have been about 8 years ago, who were just so sick of being outsourcing for American animation studios, and they were so excited because they were starting to be able to get funding to pursue their own ideas and make their own films. And now you see a lot of, especially on like streaming services, but also in the cinema, like Indian animation has just ballooned and turned into this whole industry.
Again, Black Myth Wukong, it's broken so many Steam records, both concurrence and sales, and that's like one of the first games like that out of China from a studio that's collected of people who previously made, I think, an MMO and a bunch of mobile games. A lot of which I'm
But I bet if you went on an individual basis through most of the employees and team members, you would find people who had done outsourcing for Ubisoft, EA, Sony.
Building those skills, and then they go and make their own thing.
Whenever you see like a AAA studio going, here's the 50 people who made this massive AAA game, and they're all Americans, the actual hundreds of people overseas who are doing a lot of that work, they've now got to a skill level and an experience level where they're able to go, well, actually, we don't want to make that stuff for Americans. We want to make our own stuff. And that's going to be a cycle that we're going to see continue.
Interesting
awesome.
Things be brewing. Look at us. We were on topic for a whole episode. I was going to tell you that I watched Amadeus for the first time last night.
Wow.
Oh my God. I thought it was incredible. Like, it's 10 out of 10.
Did you watch the director's cut or the original? There's a school of thought that the director's cut is the weaker cut.
I'd have to check, I guess. I loved it, dude. I thought that movie was so fucking good, and I had very little knowledge going in of what it was, and there's so many things that surprised me, but I will give, like, reference to the scene where Mozart is making Salieri write the song while dying. I
is
don't.
dictating the
Oh my
confutatis movement of the
god!
Requiem.
Because I don't know what they're fucking talking about. I don't know music, but it didn't matter because their performances were so good, and you're watching him write his
Oh,
own
yeah.
death into holy shit! Such a good.
It's also
movie.
one of the that scene. That scene is one of the great gifts to kind of basic music literacy of all time, because orchestral music in particular, one of the strengths of it is that it can be juggling multiple ideas in like quite a lot of dense material all at the same time, because you have all these people operating with potentially quite a lot of independence from one another. It's very different than once you scale things down to like a rock band of, you know, a keyboard player and a guitarist and a bass player, you know, a drummer, and maybe all of them are also singing, where the vocals are very much the thing that you're really supposed to be highly fixated on, and then maybe the guitar periodically takes over, and like obviously being very generalizing, but it's all about hyper concentration of essentially one idea. The orchestra, the trade-off with an orchestra is that it is capable of juggling a bunch of ideas and explaining the concept of that to people. Or even just when I'm in like an Uber and they ask me what I do, and I give, you know, a brief explanation, and if I mention anything about orchestral music, 90% of the time the question is, how are you able to conceive of all those different instruments? And honestly, multiple times
you say like Mozart.
I said, have you seen the scene in Amadeus
Mozart.
where
my colleague Mozart? I taught him everything he knows.
He's not doing anything that not any other composer has done throughout history, and that beautiful distillation of like, okay, you know, start with the tenors, dum pa pum 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 pa pum pum, singing out the confutatis maledictis, and then echoed by the sopranos, and then I love where he goes, and now what does he say? The motor, or like the engine, referring to the low strings doing the ba-da-bum, bum, bum, ba-da-bum, bum, bum.
Yeah.
It's one of those where you realize the pieces of the puzzle all make total sense independently, and when you put them together, suddenly you're like, oh, there's the piece. It's worth noting, if you didn't already know, that this film is obviously takes
quite
enormous
fabricated.
liberties with Mozart's
don't listen to him.
It's one of those
Said
movies
like
that
true
But I found that
Salieri
fun.
about
I
it.
loved it. I just thought it was fucking excellent.
One thing, Alana, you should do definitely specifically, I think you'd get a kick out of, is it's based on a play.
Yes.
Obviously. There's lots of recordings of brilliant different performances of those two roles, and it's kind of like finding different versions of Hamlet at this stage. It's been performed so many times, and a lot of those have been filmed. It's a much more modern play, obviously, but like I would actively encourage you to seek out like different performances, because the spin different actors have put on those two roles is also fascinating. Like,
I mean, honestly, I thought it was a perfect
it's so
movie.
well written.
It's
so
now
well written.
probably already in my top 10 favorite movies of all time. Like, I fucking loved it. So I'm totally down to find out more. 100%. But we are out of time. Thank you for indulging my Amadeus chat. I thought I'd be doing that for a lot longer, but we were on
Make
topic.
that the title of today's episode. We discuss Amadeus.
Play, watch, listen, everybody. I'm on a video game writer. That's Mike. He's a video game director. He's a video game composer. See you next time. Bye.
Bithel.
That's the one.